Thank you so much, Mike Tobin, joining us there from Brussels. While there are reports that the Islamic State has dispatched hundreds of fighters trained to attack in Europe. With me now, the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, thanks as always for being with us.
Sure.
What do you make of this basic strategy, which is to attack Europe in places where there are civilians, airports, concert halls, whatever it may be?
Well, the way ISIS sees it, Deirdre, they are living in the land of Islam in Syria and Egypt and the Middle East, and the rest of the world is the land of war, Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. So where they can cause chaos, they will do it. Hard targets are getting more difficult, and they'll do softer and softer targets. And the bottom line is they see our weakness. Here is a cell for one of the first times you have the same cell committing 2 acts of terror 4 months apart. They were able to hold up their activists from the terrorists from the ISIS movement in their homes only a few doors down from where they grew up in Molenbeek. So the bottom line, they see that they're able to effect acts of terror in Brussels, in Paris, the act from 2014 that occurred. I mean, the bottom line is they're seeing success after success, so they're going to hit us while we're weak and, you know, no holds barred.
So we do have more details on the suspects of the 3 men pushing the airport luggage carts in the surveillance photos that all of us know now all too well. 2 men are wearing these black gloves, the ones that are in black jackets or black pullovers. Those are who we believe are the suicide attackers. Investigators, though, still obviously looking for this guy on the screen. He is in a white-colored, light-colored jacket. As far as the search goes, do you think that Belgium will be able to coordinate now that they have seen an attack on their home soil?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the old strategy isn't working. Remember, this guy was found initially, Abdeslam, earlier this week, was found by a fingerprint. We're not hearing that he was found by intel from within Molenbeek. We're not hearing that Muslim organizations and community people within those neighborhoods are actually doing everything they can to help. We actually saw them throwing some rocks and calling him a hero. I mean, the bottom line is that I hope we're beginning to have a moment in which Muslims begin in those communities to say, we're going to do everything possible to help keep Belgium secure and safe. And the security apparatus beginning to say, you know, the old paradigm of waiting for them to get weapons, to go to the airport and have an organization to their cell. That last moment, we start to look before that into the communities, in the ideology, the jihadism that's being roiled within those communities that we so far have been ignoring because our lens has been all about violent extremism instead of about jihadism and Islamism.
So what do you make of the fact that Turkey, actually, to your point, I mean, this guy was wanted by Interpol. They brought him back to the Netherlands. I mean, why is this person still walking around?
That's a great question. It's, you know, because we don't have the monitoring capacity. We don't have the numbers of folks necessary to be monitoring these communities. And because of political correctness, we've avoided the types of monitoring necessary to reveal the threats that exist. And it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And unfortunately, we're only able to find them now after an attack, after they have the clues necessary. And then when they find one, they then operationalized 3 or 4 others that then committed the act within a few days after they find Abdeslam. And now we're hearing about others coming from Syria because what's happening, and by the way, I do want you to understand that the fact that they're committing more acts also means that the operations we're doing in Syria are having some impact. ISIS is feeling they're cut off of money. They're feeling their shrinking size of the land that they have in Syria. So they're beginning to do more attacks in Europe because they want to break the will of the West to do anything where they're based in Raqqa.
According to some statement that Abdeslam has actually made in that high security prison in Bruges, he has said that when he was working with people or met people from Syria, their whole point was to get France and Belgium and the UK and Germany to essentially change its foreign policy, and they felt like attacking civilians was a way to start that particular conversation. I want to ask you, though, Zuhdi, Donald Trump on Hannity last night said that the Paris terror suspect, we just referred to him, Abdeslam, probably knew about the attack yesterday.
What happened is you catch the guy last week, and they probably have lawyers all over the place. He's probably got lawyers, saying, you're going to go to trial in about 7 years, and nothing happens, and then you have the big bombings today. If they would have put him through the grill 10 minutes after they catch him, he probably would have ratted him out and maybe stopped this horrible terror attack that took place today.
So President Obama made a comment. Here it is.
Any approach that would single them out or target them for discrimination is not only wrong and un-American, but it also would be counterproductive.
Okay, so that obviously is not exactly in response to what Donald Trump implied about torture. But what should the U.S., what should the free world do at this point when you have people going into airports, going into subways, and essentially murdering innocents? Does the U.S., does the free world need to be more aggressive in interrogation techniques?
Well, listen, we can thread this needle. America is not only the most powerful country in the world, it is the greatest advocate of liberty and freedom and morality on the planet. That's what I believed when I served in the Navy for 11 years. So I think we can do both, Deirdre. I think we can portray strength and be strong and get the information we need without violating the Geneva Convention and without saying things that are doing what our enemies would do, but rather do what we would do. And yes, we have been too soft on them, and I think they need to fear us. And America is not feared anymore. We need to be feared. And perhaps we could have gotten more information. These types of individuals should be enemy combatants. He should not be treated as a citizen who committed an act of crime. He is a warrior who was working for the enemies of the West, of America. And by the way, this is why they're attacking Europe. They're not attacking Russia, who supposedly is also countering ISIS, because they're actually attacking the moderates. They're not really with us.
And probably,
Exactly.
presumably. Piers Morgan, interestingly enough, stuck up for Trump, saying when it comes to terror that we should start listening seriously to Donald Trump. In fact, he wrote an op-ed. I'll read just a line or two. Hate Donald Trump all you like, but at least he seems to recognize the magnitude of the threat, and at least he has firm proposals to try to defeat it. Now, they may not win him politically correct year of the Person of the Year award. How many more scenes like this morning's appalling images from Brussels are we going to tolerate before we try a non-PC option to beat these disgusting excuses for human beings? At the same time, there's that, and then there's President Obama, who says we don't want to profile. What's the right line in the middle?
The right line is, listen, viscerally, I get it. America's sick of losing. We're sick of being defeated. If ISIS had been decimated much more quickly, they wouldn't have had all these opportunities to do what they're doing. A slow death of ISIS is actually one of the most risky things that can happen. So we need to be much more forceful, and we can't be perceived as appeasing them. But having said that, we can't just react viscerally. He might have some short-term solutions, but I want to see long-term. You can't have a short-term strategy that works unless you target the ideology and have a long-term vision of how you're going to embrace reformist Muslims, embrace anti-Islamist Muslims, embrace the Arab awakening and not the dictators of the Middle East. I mean, there has to be a long-term strategy, or else ISIS will come back. It came back because Assad, because of Russia. All these things are part of the equation of a coherent long-term strategy.
So, Zuhdi, when you mention the philosophy, the ideology, how wise is it then to at least have a presence, a law enforcement presence in the mosques that are believed to be preaching radical Islam?
We need to have a law enforcement presence in the pools in which these radicals swim. If they happen to be mosques, if they happen to be Muslim organizations, so be it. But we can't say, well, because they're Muslim, we're going to put police there. Our mosques are transparent, so we should welcome the FBI, Homeland Security to participate, to be there, not to do illegal wiretaps, but they should do, on-the-ground type police work, just like any good cop would do on the beat in neighborhoods where there's gangs. Exactly. So we should not, because of political correctness, abandon good police work, but we should do it correctly and not sacrifice our rights. But also, listen, the NYPD had a monitoring program that was dismantled because of media exposure and political correctness. That was wrong.
Yeah,
it was a sentinel
Mayor
community.
Rudy Giuliani told us last night that was a big mistake. Dr. Jasser, we're going to have more to talk about. Stay with me, please. I just want to remind our viewers that tonight,
There's something going on that's wrong.
American Islamic Forum for Democracy President Zuhdi Jasser, back with me now. So, Zuhdi, thanks for staying with me. The Paris attacker hiding out in this area that we've been talking about in Belgium, Molenbeek. I mean, it is taking them so long to find these terrorists, right, because of a fractured municipal system. But do you believe that in the U.S. we have the same kind of radical Islamist enclaves?
Well, I think it's a bit different. I think our trajectory of separationism is much different just because families like mine felt American the moment they came here. America is about an ideology. It's about assimilation of immigrants, versus Europe has a bit more difficult time assimilating its immigrants because it's more racially based, less based on, instilling that secular democratic mindset into immigrants. Now, having said that, Muslims themselves are the major problem in that they're not adopting the ideology of the West. In America, I will tell you that we have a problem and we're headed in the same trajectory, not because we have the physical enclaves, but there's a mental enclave of a separationism, of a rejection, a sense that America's anti-Muslim, is bigoted. The organizations leading our community are under a siege mentality that make Muslims feel under siege rather than solving it and being patriotic and wanting to help the security services. You don't hear that coming from the bandwidth of American Muslim groups. Instead, you hear the victimization, the racialization of Muslims. So you have this sort of enclave mentality, but physically they're not in enclaves. There are maybe some reports of Jamaat al-Fuqra that Clarion Project talked about here and there that exists and maybe threats. But the bottom line, it's much, much less than what we see in Europe.
So, Zuhdi, we just had a map up. You already know it well, but it's basically France, Belgium sitting on top of it, Molenbeek, as we've been talking about, and that being an area where people can hide. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters was on earlier saying essentially in those areas that we actually have to stop terror by punishing the people who are harboring the terrorists. Do you think that approach can work in Europe?
Well, I think they need to use their laws. Our laws currently do punish those who are accomplices to crimes, accomplices to acts of war and terrorism. In Phoenix, we just had a trial in which an individual was for the first time convicted for supporting ISIS. And I think the community should be held on notice that if they support and facilitate, the person convicted facilitated the acts committed by Elton Simpson and those that committed the acts in Garland. So I think ultimately we should act to convict those who are accomplices. And those neighborhoods, that family that held him for 4 months should feel the pressure, the full force of the Belgian law, the French law, the law of the EU, so that their state identity, their sovereignty can be maintained against the threat of ISIS and the insurgencies that exist within these neighborhoods. And I think Ralph Peters is right that we need to begin to unravel these enclaves ideologically and monitor them because they're committing crimes against their states.
Zuhdi, if you could say one thing to President Obama today, here is how to fight terrorism, the threat of terrorism on American soil, what would it be?
I tell him, Mr. President, time to abandon this countering violent extremism, which we don't know what that is. It's just terrorism, which is an act, and adopt a policy of countering violent Islamism. The mentality, the state of mind of the radicals is a loyalty to political Islam, the Islamic State, the Caliphate, and we need to work with Muslims who want to reform against Islamism. Until our Homeland Security apparatus starts to adapt a policy to expose and infiltrate Islamist networks, we are going to continue to participate in this whack-a-mole program.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, thank you as always for the time. Appreciate your input.
Anytime.
American Airlines saying it will not